welcome to your Big Creative Life podcast. I'm glad you're here. I've been doing a lot of, I'm always doing a lot of client editing, but I thought it would be kind of fun to just do an episode where I talk about some of the feedback that I've given to authors recently. So if you're new to the podcast, I'm a full-time freelance book editor, and I work with clients who have written in any genre of fiction except no kids books or middle grade books, like YA and adult, in just about any genre, just about any type of fiction. And so I see a lot of different types of stories, different genres. The vast majority of my clients are indie authors who want to self-publish or who are self-published authors. But I do occasionally have some clients who are working on querying to try to find an agent and go the traditional publishing route. So that's a bit about the clients that I work with. I'm going to talk about editing notes that I've given to clients recently in my manuscript evaluation service, which is where it's like a lighter form of developmental editing where I'm giving the author feedback on plot, characters, pacing, conflict, dialogue. I go through and leave comments in the manuscript, and then I also write an editorial letter for them. So over the years that I've been doing this, I have noticed there are definitely common patterns, particularly among debut authors who are like new authors who are writing their first book or wanting to publish a book for the first time, whatever it is. There are definitely patterns, but I just want to share 5 common editing notes that I've given to people recently. I'm not going to share any specifics. I take client anonymity very seriously. I don't ever talk about the projects that I'm working on, and I take that very seriously. We sign a contract when you work with me. So I'm going to talk about these in general ways. And if you are a client who's listening to this and you're like, oh God, is she going to share my book? Don't worry. I will not do that at all. I'm just going to talk in a general way about notes that I've given. And these are notes that I've given to multiple authors. They're common pieces of feedback, like common suggestions. So they're going to apply to different authors and different projects that I've worked on. But yeah, I thought this might be fun to do every once in a while because maybe it'll be helpful for you kind of knowing what to spot for, particularly if you're writing in the genre that these notes are for. There's 1 or 2 things that are world building, like for fantasy or sci-fi authors. So if you're writing in one of those genres, this might be helpful to hear. And I want to say too, it's not a bad thing. I could see listening to this if you're like, oh, there are common mistakes that authors make. That's not a bad thing. I've made a lot of these mistakes or been given these suggestions myself in the past. It's part of learning how to write a good, compelling story. So I don't know. I don't think it's a bad thing that I've had to point these things out to multiple people. I think it's just kind of it's always that way, particularly because I do work with a lot of new writers. This is just how it is. And a lot of these things that we're going to talk about in this episode, people just have blind spots around, but that's always the case. We're never able to completely see our writing objectively because we're so close to it. We've spent so much time with it. And also we know what we want to have on the page, what our intention is, and we can't always accurately tell if it's showing up that way on the page. So having someone else read that and spot that for you can be really helpful to be like, oh, actually it's not what I intended, or it's supposed to be this way. Oops, I need to kind of do some work to make it come across that way, whatever it is. All right, so let's get into some specifics here. I have 5 notes that I've given recently. Number 1, it has to do with world building. So this is the note that I mentioned for sci-fi or fantasy. I've left some version of this comment and given this note a few times recently. Does the reader need to know all of this backstory about the world? Number 1. And then number 2, do they need to know all of this right now? I've left this note and wanted to address this with authors where, particularly in the beginning of the manuscript, like chapter 1, chapter 2, there's just a lot of information being thrown at the reader. If you're familiar with the term info dumping, this is what that is. This is especially common in genres where there's some kind of world building that you have to do to convey, like, hey, here's how the power structure operates in this world. Here's how the magic system is. Like, here's how the political system is structured, whatever. Just stopping the action and like giving the reader so much information, just telling them about the world, is not a very effective way to do it in most cases, particularly at the beginning of the book, because in those opening pages, those opening chapters, the reader's still getting to know the characters, right? They're still kind of like getting their bearings. And in order for the reader to like form an emotional connection to the story, to the characters, they have to have time to do that. And if you are not really having like anything happen in the plot, nothing, we've had no real opportunity to get to know the main character or characters, and you just dump all this information on us, that's not a very effective way to do it. And you probably will lose some readers in the process of doing that, like in your opening pages. So does the reader need to know all of this? I'll leave that comment sometimes where it's like a lot of information and it doesn't feel particularly relevant to what's happening. It'll be like, okay, does the reader need to know all of this? And do they need to know all of this right now? Because you can sprinkle in world building information. You don't have to give it all to the reader up front. You don't have to give it all to the reader in the same like section or chapter or whatever. You can sprinkle it throughout. That's a more digestible way for the reader to understand the world that these characters operate in. Oh, and then can you intersperse this with action, dialogue, etc.? So making sure, again, that it's not just like the action stops and then we get 4 pages of backstory. Making sure to balance some world building with action, with dialogue, so that the pacing feels okay and it doesn't feel like everything just lags because everything is stopped in order for you to tell us and explain the world to us. Note number 2 is to not gloss over important moments. Show us what happens, but also show it impacting the point of view character. So this is like a pacing and a plot note that I've given a few times recently, where sometimes authors will rush past moments that feel that are important in the story. And I have this sense as I'm reading, like, wait, why did we just breeze right past that? That's a big deal. Maybe it's, I'm going to throw out some examples, and none of these are from actual manuscripts I've worked on. I'm just pulling them out of my ass. Let's say that you, a character like breaks up with her partner in order to like go pursue this other romantic interest. If you just gloss over the fact that she ended the relationship and there's no dialogue, there's almost no like interiority to help us understand how the character's thinking and like feeling about this, and you're just on to the next love interest, it's like, wait a second, what? That's a big deal for her to leave her partner and go pursue this other love interest. You have to slow that down. You have to like, not that it has to go on for pages and pages and pages, but we've got to spend some time there to make it more impactful. And also, the key part of this too is understanding how the main character feels about that. Like, what's their emotional state? Are they having trouble processing it? Are they like, rip the Band-Aid off, now I'm completely done? Are they relieved? Like, we've got to get some access to the point of view character to understand their like the emotional stakes of this decision that they made. So that's just an example again, but not rushing through important moments in the plot and like summarizing them for the reader. If it is an important moment, we should see it play out in like an actual scene. So that's a note I've given recently in different genres too. It might sound like that example was from romance, and I guess it could be, but I've given that note in a lot of different genres recently. Number 3 is to increase the conflict and make things more dramatic, because there has to be enough propelling the plot and the characters forward. This is by far, I think, one of the, okay, if I think about like all the manuscripts I've worked on, this might be one of the most common, like the top 3 overall. This is a consistent issue that I see where across genres, where there's just not enough conflict. Conflict is important for a lot of reasons in fiction. It gives characters an opportunity to grow and change. Because if everything is fine and hunky-dory, like, why would they change? It is an opportunity for pacing, for momentum. The plot, obviously, it just really drives things forward. We need that momentum to help carry us through an entire novel. So I often will say to clients, like, think about raising the stakes. Can you make this more tense? Can you have some more internal conflict? Or just a note sometimes, like, that there's no real conflict here. Like, we've got to have something, and it does not have to mean something big, earth-shattering fight between good and evil kind of stakes. It can be something small. It can be conflict with a lowercase c, not conflict with a capital C, but there still has to be something. Even in quiet slice of life type of stories, there's got to be a little bit of conflict to propel the story forward. It's an essential component of fiction. So that's something that I give to a lot of authors. So just make sure that you have some conflict in your novel to kind of like make things more dramatic. Next up, this is a small note, but I have given this frequently in editing projects lately, is to not repeat a character's name in dialogue too often. So if you have a scene between two characters, let's say, you can have those characters say the other character's name occasionally for emphasis, but if they're saying the person's name every other line, and this goes on for pages and pages, or even if it's just like 3 pages, that's a lot. Because if you think about real life, if I am having a conversation with my friend, let's say my best friend's name is Maria. Okay, so let's say Maria and I are chatting, we're having a conversation, and every like other line I say her name, it would get old. It would feel odd. I'd be like, Maria, you can't believe what just happened to me. I dropped Audrey off at daycare, and it turns out like half the class is sick. And then she'd say something else. I'd be like, Maria, half the class was sick. It was insane. And then she's like, okay, well, what time are you going to go pick her up? I think I'm going to pick her up at like 4:00, Maria. Like, you get the point, right? It's just a lot. So make sure, kind of try to spot that when you're in editing. Don't worry about it so much when if you're on your first draft. But just be mindful of that, because it is something that feels unnatural, even though it's a tiny thing. Next, my last note that I've given recently is to cut a prologue or shorten it a lot, condense it. I think I have an entire episode, I'm pretty sure, of the podcast that's about my thoughts on prologues and how in like 90% of cases, I don't think they're needed. And this isn't just because I have some personal grievance against prologues. I just think in 90% of cases, they're not doing anything, and it's the wrong place to start the story. And it's like, especially in genres like fantasy or sci-fi, often the prologue is simply world building. It's simply backstory. We have not met the main characters yet. There's nothing to ground the story or set the stage or like have the reader get connected and immersed in this world. It's just backstory. And that's not an effective way to use a prologue. I will say that when I see effective prologues, they're often in thrillers or mysteries or fantasy. So there are certain genres where, yeah, there are more likely to be prologues that are effective and that work. And that's why I'm not against them in all cases. I think sometimes they can work and be really interesting and effective, but often it just weighs the opening down. And if you think about the opening pages, you know, they're important, whether you are publishing this yourself and you're thinking about readers, or like you're querying because you want to find an agent. Those early pages are important. And if you're not starting the story in the right place and you're just weighing it down with like information and explaining things to the reader, it's going to be boring and fall flat in 99% of cases. It's always hard. I don't want to generalize too much, but that's just how I feel. And people always point to published books that have prologues. And I'm like, well, what about these books? They all have prologues. Yes. In some cases, I would argue personally that those prologues shouldn't be there. But in a lot of cases, they're there because they're the examples of the effective ones. You're seeing the prologues that exist that are effective. You're not seeing the books where the prologue was cut because it wasn't doing anything. So of course you can point to examples where they exist and they're effective, because you're not seeing the other ones where it weighs the book down and they're not doing anything. So the other option is just to condense it, because sometimes I will see prologues that in theory are okay, but they're just so long, they might as well be like an entire chapter. It might as well be chapter 1. And I'm like, okay, you can keep the essence of this, like maybe this part would be dynamic and interesting and pull the reader in, make them interested in what's going on, but can we just get like 1 page or something? I gave that recently for a thriller author and then some fantasy authors as well. So, and you have, I've talked about prologues in social media, so if you want to go check those out, you can. And I'm 99% sure I do have a prologue episode of the podcast too, if you want to hear more of my thoughts on it, on prologues generally. So those are some notes that I've given recently. If y'all like this format, if it's helpful to hear, let me know and I can do more. Again, I will never give specific examples or talk about specific projects, but we could do this periodically. I can kind of keep track just on my notes app of feedback or notes that I'm giving, because again, there are patterns. Every manuscript is different. Every single manuscript that I work on has its own strengths, its own challenges, its own opportunities for improvement. So it's never the same across the board, but there are that like 10% or 15% of suggestions that I give just a lot, because it's easy to fall into those pitfalls as a new writer. Again, I've made a lot of these mistakes that I've talked about. The prologue one, just as an example, when I wrote my first book that was women's fiction, I had a prologue in there that was like 2 pages maybe. It wasn't a full long prologue or anything, but it was from a scene much later in the book, like right around the climax, and I put it at the beginning as a way to like make it exciting for the reader, because I thought you kind of needed to do that. And then chapter 1 opened like back in the past, and then we saw like everything leading up to that moment, and I got feedback that was like, I actually completely forgot about this. Like, I completely forgot about this moment when I went and read the rest of the book. Like, it doesn't really do much. And the other thing to remember too, one final note, I guess, about prologues is that some readers just don't read them. So if you have essential information in your prologue where like the reader is going to be so confused in chapter 1, think about that some readers just skip prologues altogether. So yeah, again, I've made a lot of these mistakes. It's just kind of par for the course. It's like how you learn, how you grow as a writer. We're always learning, we're always growing, we're always improving with every single thing that we write. And so being aware of these things is just like part of that. It doesn't mean you're a bad writer. It doesn't mean that you're not ever going to get a book published or improve. It's just, again, like, I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot, but it's true. It's just part of writing, is like getting better and becoming aware of these things. I wasn't aware of that stuff about prologues until I got that feedback, until I started beta reading, until I started like working with other writers in my critique group, until I started editing professionally. It was just something I never really thought about. So anyways, I hope this was helpful, and I'd love y'all's feedback on this. If this was helpful, let me know. You can send me a DM at Katie Wolf Writes on Instagram with your thoughts. All right, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.